Islamic. Even Muhammad's name for the pilgrimage, Hajj and Umrah, were borrowed from his pagan past. The pagan Qusayy, arriving at the 10th village, established the model Muhammad would ultimately require Muslims to follow. But that's not all he did to inspire Islam's future prophet.
Ishaq. At the time Hulayl was in charge of the Kaaba and ruled in Mecca, Qusayy asked him for the hand of his daughter Hubba in marriage.
She was the wealthiest and best-connected woman in town. 5 generations later, Muhammad, abandoned and penniless, would marry Khadija, the wealthiest woman in Mecca, a family tradition. Settling in, the newlyweds made 4 babies, 2 of which were named after the local rock gods, underscoring the fraudulent nature of Muhammad's religious invention.
Hubba bore him Abd al-Dar, Abd Manaf, Abd al-Uzza, and Abd. His progeny increased, his wealth multiplied, and he became greatly honored.
Qusayy showed that he was a heathen idolater when he named his kids after rock idols. Yet he performed a pilgrimage to Mecca in a holy month. He moved in with the king, the custodian of the Kaaba, and married his daughter. They named their first kids slave to the house, the most important things in their lives, their source of wealth and power. Then they honored their gods by naming their next 2 children after them. And while it's interesting that Allah didn't even get an honorable mention, that's not the biggest problem. These passages confirm that the Kaaba was a pagan shrine, and at best, Allah was just one of many gods. The veneration of the house of idols shows that it was unconnected to any monotheistic religion, Islam included. A hadith gives us a glimpse of what was to come.
Ishaq. Qusayy thought he had a better right to the Kaaba and to rule over Mecca than the Khuzas, since the Quraysh were the most noble and pure descendants of Ishmael.
The motivation for Islam can be condensed into a similar sentence. Muhammad thought he had a better right to the Kaaba and to rule over Mecca than his family. If you keep this in mind, everything associated with Islam's formation will make sense. The sages who crafted this tradition in Baghdad, a dozen generations after Qusay's death, must have thought their audience would remain as ignorant as their religious teachings were preposterous. First, in an illiterate society, how would Qusayy know that he was any more a direct descendant of Ishmael than any other Arab? Ishmael had been sandals up for 2,500 years. Without copious and exacting written records, genealogies are impossible to establish after a handful of generations. Arabic, as a written language, had yet to be invented, and there were nearly 60 generations separating these men. Second, how would they purport to know what Qusayy thought? There were no written accounts to connect him and his thoughts to the day these hadith were written, 4 centuries later. Since this scenario is impossible, the only reason Muslim scholars felt compelled to legitimize Qusay's right to the Kaaba and rule over Mecca was to justify his great-great-great-grandson's claim.
Tabari. He called upon his fellow tribesmen, the Quraysh, to expel the Quzaa and to seize Mecca for themselves. They accepted his proposal and swore an oath of allegiance to him.
While I'm stunned the world hasn't exposed the scam that became Islam, I'm grateful that the Islamic scriptures make it so easy. Muhammad would do precisely the same thing. He called upon his raiders to conquer the Quraysh and seized control of the town. They accepted his proposal and swore oaths of allegiance to him. While we will cover these pledges later, suffice it to say for now, like Qusay's oath, it was a call to arms. And as with Muhammad, the Meccans were the enemy, and the target was the Kaaba. Tabari, relying upon traditions collected by Ishaq, reports,
The Arabs, recognizing their religious duty, accompanied Qusayy. Marching to the Kaaba, they said, "We have better right to this than you." At that they opposed one another and began to fight. A fierce battle broke out, as a result of which Qusayy wrested from them the privileges which had been in their hands, thus denying them.
Little did they know how fraught with portent these words would be. They haunt us to this day. Before we leave the skirmish, I feel obliged to share the alternate peaceful version.
Tabari. Qusayy purchased the custodianship of the Kaaba for a skinful of wine and a lute.
While this variant earns kudos for nonviolence, it's hardly religious, purchasing a shrine that stands at the center of Islamic life, their God's house, for things their religion outlaws, music and booze, is laughably ironic. It's also an example of conflicting truths. Proving that Islam has something for everybody, Ishaq serves up alternative 3. This one foreshadows Islamic terrorists today and their willingness to use biological agents.
I have heard, and Allah knows best, that the Qusayy were seized by an outbreak of pustules which nearly wiped them out. They abandoned Mecca.
Making sure he had all his bases covered, Ishaq provided a 4th alternative. This one was for the doves, those who would use the peace process to steal that which they covet.
Ishaq. Both sides called for peace and the appointment of one of the Arabs to arbitrate between them on their differences.
This was evidently the model Jimmy Carter used to win the Nobel Peace Prize. All the spoils went to the Muslims. The infidels traded their land and money and got nothing in return.
The verdict was that Qusayy,
read Arabs or Muslims,
had a better claim to the Kaaba,
read Temple Mount,
and to rule Mecca,
read Jerusalem,
than the Qusayy,
read Jews.
All the injuries inflicted and blood shed by Qusayy,
read suicide bombers or Arab armies,
upon the Qusayy,
read Jews,
were cancelled and disregarded,
read forgotten, excused, or justified,
while all injuries inflicted by the Qusayy,
read Jews,
upon the Quraysh,
read Muslims or Arabs,
should be compensated for by blood money.
Read Carter committed the United States to paying Arabs, who lost the Six-Day War, $2 billion a year in perpetuity.
He added that Qusayy should be given a free hand to control the Kaaba and Mecca.
Nothing has changed. Diplomacy with Islamic tyrants remains equally unbalanced and equally futile. Whether Qusayy prevailed by force, bribe, the peace process, or pestilence, he gained control of the tent village and rock shrine that had been populated by the patriarch's great-great-grandfather, Luhay. Ibn Ishaq chronicled the momentous event as only a Muslim could.
Ishaq. Thus Qusayy gained authority over the Kaaba and the lordship over the people of Mecca. He behaved like a king over his tribe, so they made him a king.
Qusayy, having established the model for Muhammad, went on to build the family business. Let's listen to how it was done.
Ishaq. Qusayy assumed control and kingship. He was obeyed. He held the keys to the shrine, being the doorkeeper of the Kaaba. He held the right to the water and the pilgrims from the well of Zamzam and to feed them. He presided at the assemblies and held the right to hand out the war banners. In his hands lay all the dignities of Mecca, all of which he took for himself.
This is the essence of Islam. Muhammad would speak these same words upon his conquest of Mecca. Then Qusayy established the model Muhammad would follow in Yathrib when he expelled the Jews from their homes by force, and he rewarded his fellow Muslims by dividing their property between them.
He also divided the property in Mecca among his followers, settling every clan of the Quraysh in the dwelling places assigned to them. No issue regarding public affairs was decided, nor was any banner of war entrusted without Qusay's permission.
Scores of years later, Muhammad would use force to gain control over Medina, Mecca, the Kaaba, its god, its dwellings, its well, pilgrims, assemblies, and even the dispensation of war banners. He behaved like a king, forcing his will on his tribe, killing anyone who got in his way. While these hadith prove that Muhammad wasn't the least bit inventive, he has to be given credit for recognizing a workable plan and executing it. The pagan Qusayy, a charlatan, nourished every important aspect of Islam generations before Muhammad was born. Moreover, he, like the Prophet, did it in pursuit of sex, power, and money. The tradition concludes with these haunting words, words that became prophetic.
Tabari and Ishaq. Qusay's authority among the Quraysh during his lifetime and after his death was like a religion which the people followed and which could not be infringed. They always acted in accordance with its laws. They regarded it as filled with good omens and recognized his superiority and nobility. He took for himself the assembly house, which led from it to the mosque, the place of prostration, of the